Ever felt like you're living in your own home, but nobody ever really sees you? Ever poured out your heart, only to have your place at the table disappear? Ever wondered what happens when you finally choose yourself over being just the caregiver? Hi there, I'm Jane, and if you've ever been the one baking the cookies, wiping the counters, or staying up late to soothe little ones, only to be told there's no room for you, then today's story is for you. I used to believe that love meant endless giving, that kindness meant being invisible. But one chilly Christmas Eve, I discovered that boundaries aren't barriers, they're bridges back to ourselves. In the next 30 minutes, I'm going to invite you into a journey of rediscovery. How a simple, silent act of claiming a key in a deed transformed a life of quiet sacrifice into a bold declaration of self-worth. You'll hear the moments when the heartache first sank in the whispers of doubt. I almost let drown me, and the spark that ignited the courage to say enough. We'll walk together through the emotional turning point when the weight of a cold cup of tea in my hand told me that love, without respect, becomes nothing more than labor. You'll see how small secret preparations can set the stage for a powerful stand, and learn the gentle art of crafting your own text that changes everything without a single raised voice. Along the way, I'll share practical tips I gathered: how to locate the paperwork that proves your place, how to pack up your dignity while still pouring dinner, and how to turn a family group chat into your most effective advocate. And we'll celebrate the rebuilding that comes after the storm, planting marigolds in the yard, repainting the walls, and rediscovering hobbies that remind you who you are beneath the caregiver role. By the end of this video, my hope is that you'll feel inspired, not just to set boundaries, but to nurture the garden of your own well-being. You'll see that the path from silence to self-respect can be as gentle as planting flowers and as revolutionary as standing firm on the ground you've always owned. So if you're ready to stop fading into the wallpaper and start blooming in full color, let's dive in. Together, we'll uncover how one woman reclaimed her home, her voice, and her joy, one brave step at a time. And who knows, you might just find the key to unlock your own new beginning. Let's explore what happens next. I never quite realized how invisible I felt until one day I paused mid-meal, prep flour, dusted, and apron-clad, and wondered, if no one notices when I'm here, what makes anyone think they'll notice when I'm gone? For years, I had been the household's quiet engine baking cookies, for bedtime stories, scrubbing sinks after dinner, staying up to soothe fevers and broken hearts. I wore my role like a badge of honor, convinced that love meant constant giving. But what I didn't see then was how that very devotion had become a shield hiding my needs and muffling my voice. In the simplest terms, caregiving is the daily work of meeting others' needs, meals, errands, emotional support, even the little rituals like tucking in blankets or arranging fresh flowers on the windowsill. Yet because it's so routine, we often take it for granted. It's easy to think, of course, Grandma will make the pie, or Mom always picks up the dry cleaning, without ever pausing to acknowledge that those tasks require time, energy, and yes, boundaries. When someone does something for you without asking, it feels like a gift. Over time, that gift starts to feel like an expectation, and then, without anyone noticing it, becomes invisible labor. I remember Aunt Rosa telling me how, after her husband passed away, she found herself still cooking 2 extra dinners every night just out of habit, only to throw them away because nobody was there to eat them. I didn't even realize I was doing it until the cupboards ran dry. She laughed sadly. Her story hit me hard. I had friends whose mental health plummeted under the weight of unseen chores, their identities swallowed by task lists and thankless routines. Meanwhile, spouses sometimes treated partners like personal assistants. Can you drop off my shirt before work? Or, don't forget my coffee order requests, hurled across the room with no recognition of the effort involved. Parental neglect can take the same shape. Kids expect mom or dad to fill every need, forgetting they're people, not appliances. What makes caregiving invisible is its very nature. It's nurturing, unglamorous, and often unscripted. No one hands out awards for matching t-shirt socks or for refilling the bird feeder at dawn. And because it's driven by love, we tend to excuse ourselves from taking credit. We think I'm lucky to help, when in reality, we're overlooking a crucial truth. Kindness without acknowledgement can become exploitation. When every request is met without question, we train our loved ones to assume that our time, energy, and comfort are endless commodities, something they can dip into at will. I learned this lesson slowly. One afternoon, when I was picking up after a neighborhood potluck, I overheard two young mothers comparing horror stories about childcare. They weren't talking about their children's antics. They were trading notes on babysitters who charged too much or not enough, who milled about doing nothing or disappeared mid-shift. It struck me that as caregivers, paid or unpaid, we are worth something. We have expertise, patience, and emotional labor to offer, and it's okay to define the terms of that offering. No one would expect to get an electric drill from the neighbor without asking, or to borrow her car at midnight just because she owns it. So why did we assume it was fine to ask for continuous care? Here's a small truth I wish someone had told me sooner. Every act of care has a limit. Even the most generous heart needs rest, recognition, and reciprocity. If you pour water into a cup that has no drain, it eventually overflows or erodes its container. The same is true for us. Without acknowledgement, praise, or a break, our caring spirit can turn weary, resentful, or even bitter. One mistake I often made was blending love and obligation until I couldn't tell them apart. I'd vacuum the living room because I loved how it looked and because I couldn't face the judgment I imagined if I didn't. I'd call around to find a last-minute prescription refill, pretending it was no big deal, rather than ask for help when I was overwhelmed. And in so doing, I let others assume my silence was contentment. Spoiler alert: silence is not consent. Let me share a quick example from my own kitchen. On Sunday mornings, I'd wake early to bake cinnamon rolls, the family's favorite. And by the time the sweet aroma drifted through the house, everyone was delighted. But one day, I slept in an extra hour, and the house fell silent. When I finally came downstairs, half awake, I found empty coffee mugs on the counter, but no one waiting, no excited hello to greet me. That moment felt like a gentle alarm bell. The ritual was loved, but the person behind it had become an afterthought. They loved the rolls more than they loved me. That realization was uncomfortable, but it was also liberating. It reminded me that recognition matters. A simple thank you, a shared task, or even a cup of coffee delivered to my bedside. All these small gestures signal that the caregiver is valued, not just the service. Here's the first lesson I want to leave you with: your care matters, and so do you. When you find yourself shouldering more than feels fair, pause and ask, how much of this am I doing because I want to, and how much because I'm afraid of being seen as unhelpful. Another common misstep is conflating kindness with martyrdom. We romanticize the idea of the suffering caregiver, the sacrificial figure who never complains, when in reality that model robs both giver and receiver of genuine connection. Instead, try something else. Share the load and share your feelings. It might sound like, I love cooking dinner, but I'm running low on energy these days. Could you pick up a pizza next week? Or, I've been feeling stretched thin. It'd mean a lot if you noticed when I've done more than usual. By naming our contributions and inviting acknowledgement, we stop being invisible and start creating a culture of mutual respect. That doesn't mean keeping score or demanding immediate repayment. It means building relationships rooted in awareness of each other's efforts and needs. As we wrap up this first chapter, recognizing the unseen labor, it's important to know you're not alone in feeling this way. Countless caregivers of all ages and roles experience the same erasure. The good news: awareness is the first step toward change. When you shine a light on the work you do, you give others the chance to see, acknowledge, and share the load. Next, we'll dive into that pivotal moment when small, everyday expectations become a tipping point, the bed incident, as I like to call it, where I finally realized that love without respect is labor, and why sometimes the smallest acts can spark the biggest transformations. Let's keep going. I can still feel the echo of that Christmas Eve, as if it were playing on a loop in my mind. The tree was trimmed to perfection, its lights twinkling through the living room, like little promises of cheer. The scent of cinnamon and a hint of pine from the branches drifted into every corner. All day, I'd been bustling back and forth, stirring gravy, setting out platters of turkey, and fluffing pillows for guests. It felt like any other holiday, until it didn't. Just after dinner, my daughter-in-law found me washing dishes in the kitchen. She cleared her throat softly, almost kindly, and said, "The kids are going to need the guest room tonight. Grandma, you can sleep on the floor. It's just for one night." Her voice was calm, matter of fact, like she was asking me to grab an extra spoon rather than announcing my displacement. In that instant, my heart did a little flip. I froze, the hot water running through my fingers, suddenly feeling cold. The guest room, my own bed, where I had tucked myself night after night, had become the kids' playground. Bunk beds, stacked too close, pillows strewn aside, a thin mattress pushed into the corner. The sheets I'd smoothed earlier lay crumpled as if in protest. I remember how Emma, my youngest granddaughter, scampered in her socks, sliding across the hardwood floor. She threw herself onto the mattress and squealed, "I love this bed, Grandma." She hugged a pillow with such innocent joy that my chest tightened. That pillow was once mine, my sanctuary after nights of cooking, my cushion during afternoon rests. The enormity of what was happening hit me all at once. The family needed my bed more than they needed me to have a comfortable place to sleep. It wasn't just about the mattress. It was about respect. It was the realization that the simplest request, "It's just for one night," had become permission for them to take my comfort for granted. I stood there, hands trembling, the spoon slipping from the sudsy water, and I realized I had crossed an invisible line I hadn't even known existed. I have talked to friends who face similar moments of abrupt erasure. My neighbor Linda once shared how after she spent weeks caring for her sister through a surgery, her own bedroom got turned into a craft room for her grandchildren, complete with paint-splattered tables and glue sticks rolling around the floor. When she politely asked for her space back, she was told, "We thought you'd be okay downstairs." Linda's voice cracked when she told me I realized I was okay with being okay in my own house until I wasn't. It's astonishing how quickly, just for one night, can transform into any night at all. Those small requests, "Fetch this run," that "Borrow mine," start to accumulate. We tell ourselves we're being helpful, loving even, but then the line between generosity and exploitation blurs, and before we know it, our own needs fade behind the chorus of everyone else's. That Christmas Eve, I didn't speak. I simply dried my hands, folded my apron, and looked around the kitchen as if seeing it for the first time. The counters I had polished with love now felt like a stage set, all decor and no substance. The laughter from the other room, once comforting, sounded distant, an uninvited party in my home. Looking back, I see how the moment's power lay in its absurd simplicity. No shouting match, no dramatic confrontation, just a quiet statement that my needs weren't a priority, and that silence was louder than any argument. Here's a lesson I carry with me. When your comfort is dismissed as a minor detail, it's a red flag. If someone asks you to give up a basic need, sleep, nourishment, rest, pause. Ask yourself, would I ask a friend to do this for me? If the answer is no, then you deserve the same courtesy you'd extend to others. After the initial shock, I retreated to the living room, clutching a cup of tea so cold it felt like ice. I watched the family gather around the tree, voices bright with excitement. I'd baked cookies for those very smiles, and yet no one noticed I was standing on the fringes. It was a moment of waking. I realized that the roles we play in families can shift so gradually that the people we love most don't even see the change happening. In practical terms, that night taught me the importance of speaking up in the moment. I should have looked my daughter-in-law in the eye and said, "Thank you for letting me know, but I need my bed tonight." Instead, I swallowed my hurt and carried it with me, giving her and everyone else leave to assume my silence was acceptance. I've heard from many folks who've had their beds taken for storage home, office makeovers, or overnight guests who never leave. One woman told me her bedroom was converted into a man cave in the basement, complete with a recliner, a TV, and a mini fridge, while she was left on a folding cot in the hall. She laughed ruefully when she said, "I realized I'd become the tour guide to my own home, showing people around spaces I'd once owned. Say yes too often, and people come to expect it. The next time they ask, even if they preface it with 'just for one night,' they carry the unspoken confidence that you won't say no, but your needs deserve as much attention as anyone else's." Before we move forward, here's another takeaway. When a small act, borrowing your car, using your favorite chair, sleeping in your bed, becomes routine, it's time to revisit the unwritten agreement. Gently, but firmly, reestablish the boundaries that got misplaced. It might feel uncomfortable at first, but discomfort is a small price for maintaining dignity. That night, as I lay down on the floor beside the thin mattress, I stared up at the glittering tree lights and made a silent vow. This wasn't the end of my story. It was merely the chapter that forced me to see how far I had drifted from honoring my own worth. In our next section, we'll explore the deep emotional reckoning that comes when caregiving feels like work and love, without respect, starts to weigh you down. We'll talk about what happens when you realize that endless giving can turn your heart into a bruised vessel, and how that revelation can spark the courage to reclaim yourself. Let's continue on this journey together. I still remember the day it hit me like a wave. I was folding laundry again when my chest tightened, and I realized the pile in my arms wasn't lightening my load. It was crushing my spirit. For years, I had equated love with service. If I cared, I cooked. If I cared deeply, I scrubbed floors until they shone. But that afternoon, the routine click of hangers and the hum of the washing machine sounded less like a comforting soundtrack and more like a metronome counting off unpaid hours of my life. The truth is that giving care feels good until it doesn't. There comes a point when the kindness we freely offer transforms into an expectation others take for granted. When I asked for nothing in return, I unwittingly taught my family that my time and energy were free to use. That lesson sunk in slowly at first, as a niggling discomfort, then as a persistent ache. It's common for caregivers to experience this without realizing why. One friend, Karen, recounted how, after months of coordinating medications and running errands for her aging mother, she found herself snapping at a barista who got her coffee order wrong. She felt mortified, but the misplaced frustration surprised her even more. She was angry at the little mistakes of strangers when she tolerated much bigger ones from loved ones. That disconnect is a red flag. When we hold ourselves to impossible standards of patience and service, but offer ourselves no grace, resentment is inevitable. For me, the emotional reckoning began with small, everyday blows, like the time I spent an entire afternoon curating family photo albums for siblings who didn't even send a thank you note, or the morning I showed up at my son's workplace to drop off dinner and he invited his coworkers but didn't mention to me that he'd already eaten. Each moment hurt in isolation, but taken together, they formed a tapestry of neglect. I used to brush off those pangs. I'm just being sensitive, I'd think. They don't mean any harm. But those little hurts piled up until I could no longer ignore the cavernous gap between my limitless giving and the scant appreciation I received. I realized I was running on empty. It struck me that when I baked cookies every week, no one checked if I needed a break. When I hosted holiday dinners, no one offered to handle the cleanup. When I sat through bedtime stories countless nights, not once did my family ask if I wanted to skip one and rest. I started keeping a mental checklist: meals cooked, errands run, favors granted, and compared it to favors I'd asked for myself. The score was embarrassingly lopsided. That's when the resentment crept in. But resentment is a tricky beast. It whispers that our generosity is a burden on others rather than an act of love. If we see giving as an obligation, it becomes a chore, and the very thing that once brought joy becomes a source of guilt and shame. I remember lying awake, wondering how I could unravel years of habit without fracturing the relationships I cherished. In the midst of that storm, I sought advice from a therapist friend, Maria. Over tea, she said something that pierced through my defensiveness. Love isn't a bottomless well. You need to refill yourself. Simple words, but powerful. I realized self-care wasn't optional. It was a prerequisite for sustainable love. If I didn't respect my own boundaries, how could I expect others to respect them? Putting that insight into practice felt daunting. I started small, declaring one evening a week my evening, where I said no to kitchen duty and yes to a hot bath and a good book. I resisted the urge to apologize for taking that time. I set my phone to do not disturb and watched guilt rise in my chest, then tried to breathe it away. Along the way, I made my first seal request. Could someone else load the dishwasher tonight? I'd like to take a break. My voice wavered, but I said it. The response surprised me. My son looked up from his phone, blinked, and actually offered, "Sure, Mom." He didn't roll his eyes or protest. It was a small victory, but it signaled a shift. My boundaries mattered. That moment reminded me how easy it is to conflate love with martyrdom. We admire the self-sacrificing caregiver in movies, the one who never rests, whose every action is for others. But real love thrives on mutual respect. In a healthy dynamic, each person notices the other's efforts and honors their right to rest, recharge, and ask for support. If you've ever wondered why you feel drained despite doing so much, here's a lesson that might help. Caring for others doesn't have to cost you your own well-being. It's a bit like walking a dog. You want to keep the leash loose. Too tight, and you're yanked around. Too loose, and you risk the dog running wild. Boundaries are the slack in the line that lets both you and your loved ones move comfortably together. Of course, setting boundaries isn't always as neat as that metaphor. There were days I faltered, agreeing to every request, because I feared guilt or disappointment. Other times, I overcompensated, refusing to help even when I could have, and then feeling guilty for drawing the line so sharply. It was a balancing act, and I learned that boundaries aren't rigid walls, but flexible frameworks that need occasional adjustment. One practical strategy I adopted was scheduling my caregiving. If family chores were to fall on me, I'd put them on a calendar, just as I would any appointment. Mom cooks dinner when on Tuesday and Thursday. Mom helps with bills on Saturday morning. Everything else was off the table unless I volunteered. That structure helped others see that my time was finite and valuable. Another approach was inviting collaboration rather than demanding a complete stop to my help. I would say, "I'm happy to make dinner, but could you chop the vegetables? Or I'll drive you to your appointment. Would you mind filling out the forms?" By sharing tasks, I kept connection alive while keeping my own needs in view. Slowly, I felt the weight of unspoken expectations lift. I started noticing energy returning to my spirit. The kitchen smelled more like possibility and less like obligation. Friends remarked that I seemed lighter, more present. But perhaps the most telling sign was when I no longer dreaded the sound of my own footsteps in the hall. At dinner time, I'd stopped bracing for the next chore. The emotional reckoning isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice. There are still days when I slip into old habits, eager to please and fearful of disappointing someone. But now, I catch myself sooner when the guilt creeps up, or when I find myself saying yes out of obligation rather than genuine desire. I remind myself that rest is not insubordination. As we move into the next chapter of this journey, we'll look at how facts and paperwork became my secret weapon in reclaiming not just my home, but my dignity. I'll share how a dusty deed and an old key unlocked more than a front door. They unlocked the proof that I had every right to insist on respect. Until then, remember, love is a gift you give freely, but it's also a gift you owe yourself. When you honor your needs, you strengthen your capacity to care deeply without losing yourself in the process. After that Christmas Eve, on the floor, I was determined not to let my worth hinge on anyone's goodwill. But I needed more than willpower. I needed proof. That's when I remembered the old cardboard box tucked beneath my mattress, the one I'd stashed years ago when my kids first moved in. It contained family photos, letters, and wrapped carefully in an envelope my house deed. Holding that scuffed package in my hands felt like finding buried treasure. I sat cross-legged on the floor, heart hammering, and pulled out the document, a crisp, embossed certificate bearing my name as sole owner. I traced the signature of the county clerk and the notary seal, and suddenly, I wasn't just mom or grandma. I was the legal landlord of every board and beam, every pipe and picture hook in this house. Understanding what a deed really means can feel dry on paper, but in that moment, it was electric. A property deed isn't just a formality. It's the recorded statement that you hold title to a piece of land and the structures upon it. Unlike a lease, which grants temporary occupancy, a deed conveys ownership, complete with the right to control who lives there, set terms of occupancy, and protect your investment. In my case, it reversed the unspoken assumption that the home belonged to anyone who lived there. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table with the deed spread out before me, gathering courage. I called my old friend Carla, a real estate agent, and peppered her with questions. How complete must the title chain be? Could old loans or liens interfere? She reassured me that her records showed the mortgage was paid off years ago, with no outstanding encumbrances, and that no rental agreement had ever been filed. My name on the deed stood unchallenged. Armed with that information, I realized that knowledge is power, and paperwork is the most unambiguous way to wield it. Facts don't lie, and they don't argue. When I held that deed aloft, I could claim my home not just in spirit, but in law. In one swift move, my shaky confidence turned solid. I went from a fuzzy sense of grievance to a clear, actionable right. I recall another woman, let's call her Diane, who faced a similar situation when her daughter and grandkids moved in after a divorce. They never signed a lease, but Diane assumed they'd always be family. After a heated argument one autumn, Diane discovered an old lease her ex-husband had signed that granted tenancy to the new occupants, but with clauses unmet for months. She showed it to a lawyer who drafted a notice to vacate based on breach of contract. The moment Diane held that lease in her hands, she reclaimed the upper hand. The family moved out within weeks, no court date required. Back in my kitchen, I took practical steps to solidify my position. First, I made a certified copy of the deed at the county recorder's office, just in case the original ever got misplaced. I tucked one copy in a fireproof safe, and another I scanned and emailed to myself. I annotated the margins with dates mortgage paid off, no lease agreement, and owner occupied. Documentation doesn't have to be fancy. It just has to exist. Next, I consulted an elder law attorney friend, Mr. Harris, who guided me through issuing a formal notice of intent to in-laws as occupants. He crafted a concise, respectful letter reminding them that I, as the homeowner, had not consented to a tenancy agreement. He also included a friendly reminder that ongoing arrangements would need written consent moving forward. That letter went out by certified mail, giving everyone a clear record of when they were officially informed. Here's a lesson I learned. Legal rights aren't about threats or wielding authority vindictively. They're about clarity and fairness. By presenting facts, my deed, the absence of a lease, the letter of notice, I made sure there was no room for misunderstanding. Anyone could see I wasn't reneging on love or hospitality. I was merely asserting the conditions under which that hospitality was offered. I discovered another practical tool along the way: local senior center mediation services. They offered a neutral space for me to present my deed, discuss concerns, and brainstorm solutions. In my experience, having a third party present keeps emotions in check and conversations on track. Sometimes, witnessing a document's authority in person helps family members appreciate the gravity of the situation. Of course, unearthing the deed was more than a bureaucratic exercise. It was a transformative moment for my self-esteem. For the first time in years, I felt aligned. My inner sense of ownership matched the external reality. I was no longer a guest whose presence could be revoked on a whim. I was the homeowner, the one whose signature mattered most. With that foundation laid, my confidence bloomed. I didn't need to brandish the deed in everyone's face. It was enough to know it existed. My next task was to prepare for the conversation that would change everything. I began laying out a subtle plan, gathering essentials, packing keepsakes, and rehearsing my script, not in defiance, but in readiness. Shelving the deed back into my safe felt symbolic, as if I were tucking away my old, hesitant self. I cleaned the kitchen counter and poured myself a cup of tea, feeling a warmth that had nothing to do with caffeine. I realized that the bed incident, the unnoticed labor I had been reacting, now I was acting purposefully and empowered by the solid ground of legal fact. In the coming days, I'd move from quiet assertion to deliberate preparation. I'd need to balance daily routines, cooking, cleaning conversations, with packing boxes of personal items and drafting the texts that would set the timeline. My deed had given me the right. Now, I needed the resolve. Before we delve into that next chapter of secret plans and silent packing, remember, this uncovering facts and paperwork isn't cold or confrontational. It's clarifying. When you know exactly where you stand, you can make decisions from a place of strength rather than fear. Having the deed in hand meant I was no longer swept along by others' assumptions. I held the map. Next, we'll explore how I used that clarity to craft a quiet, carefully timed preparation, packing keepsakes, protecting memories, and reserving the element of surprise for the moment I would announce my boundaries. Let's step into that secret plan together and discover how small preparations can set the stage for your own powerful stand. After I confirmed my ownership, with that deed safely tucked away, I faced a new challenge: how to transform empowerment into action without tipping my hand. I needed to prepare carefully, quietly, and deliberately, so that when the time came to assert my boundaries, I stood on solid ground. What followed was what I like to call the secret packing, a slow, methodical gathering of every personal treasure I valued, woven seamlessly into my everyday routine. It began one evening when the house was humming with leftover holiday chatter. I slipped into the spare room, the one now cluttered with the kids' toys and blankets, and cleared a small patch of carpet. I laid down a soft cloth and placed my mother's quilt at its center. Folding it gently, I bundled it into a sturdy plastic bin. That first box felt heavy in my arms, weighted not just by fabric, but by decades of memories. I carried it down the stairs and slid it under the landing, where no one ever ventured. The next night, after dinner and the dishes were done, I returned for box number 2. This time, it held my wedding photo album, its leather cover faded but still warm under my fingers. I wrapped it in bubble wrap and nestled it next to the quilt. Back and forth, I went each trip like a heartbeat, steady and purposeful. Over a week, I packed china plates, my grandmother's handwritten recipe cards, the little accordion file of letters my late husband had sent me. Every night I chose 1 or 2 items, no more, to keep suspicion at bay. I learned through trial and error that timing matters. Packing during predictable windows, after dinner cleanup, before my usual television show, or during a nightly phone call, created a pattern that my family would miss. If I moved too much at once, they'd notice. If too little, I'd lose momentum. Consistency became my ally. Alongside the physical act of boxing up keepsakes, I began drafting mental scripts. What if someone noticed the empty cabinet? Should I say I was reorganizing, or that I planned to donate old linens? I opted for the simpler truth. I'm decluttering. I'd say smiling and mention a local charity that appreciated household goods. That little white lie kept questions to a minimum, and who would suspect me of decluttering when I was already stretched thin by holiday hosting? One practical tip I picked up from a forum of long-distance movers was to use clear plastic bins. They stack neatly, protect against moisture, and allow me to see contents at a glance. Plus, they look innocuous, like the laundry supplies I sometimes kept under the stairs. I labeled each bin with a discrete number, not heirlooms or photos, but simply bin A, bin B, and so on. That way, if I ever needed to grab something in a hurry, I could. Inevitably, I encountered small hiccups. One evening, I found my daughter-in-law's yoga mat leaning against the spot where I'd hidden a bin. My heart leapt, but I diverted gracefully. "Oh, I was just clearing a space for your mat," I said. She nodded and moved on. I realized that confidence in my explanation mattered more than the explanation itself. As long as I spoke with ease, people accepted my words without probing. A crucial part of this phase was emotional preparation. Packing wasn't just about possessions. It was about reconciling myself to the possibility of moving out, or at least living on my terms. Some nights, I felt a pang of grief, seeing albums vanish into plastic. Other nights, I felt a surge of exhilaration, picturing a fresh start where my things were safe and respected. I often paused between trips, pressing my hand to my chest and reminding myself that I was doing this not out of anger, but out of self-respect. One lesson that emerged clearly: small, steady actions build unshakable confidence. By the time I'd stashed away a half-dozen bins, I felt a quiet certainty that I could follow through on my vow. Rather than a sudden upheaval, the process felt like laying bricks, each one a reminder that I mattered, that my past and my comfort deserved safeguarding. I also enlisted help indirectly. A longtime friend, Clara, dropped by for tea one afternoon. While we chatted, I steered her toward the topic of decluttering and home organization. She enthusiastically shared recommendations for storage solutions and packing supplies. When she left, she gave me a roll of heavy-duty packing tape just in case. Little did she know how useful that tape would become. By the end of 2 weeks, I had 9 bins discreetly stored under the stairs and in the back of my car. I'd packed enough to cover my essentials, linens, photos, jewelry, a few favorite books, leaving everyday dishes, and the bare minimum of cookware in the kitchen. Everything I wasn't willing to lose was secured. Everything else remained in place, so as not to arouse suspicion. Then came the psychological turning point, rehearsing the moment I'd ask my family to respect my boundaries. I envisioned sitting at the kitchen table, the deed folded beside me, my packed bins waiting downstairs. I pictured myself speaking calmly, no anger, no drama, and stating my terms. The groundwork laid by secret packing meant I wouldn't be scrambling for valuables while trying to maintain composure. I'd already done the heavy lifting. Another practical insight: keeping a simple log. On my phone, I noted dates and items packed. That log served two purposes. It helped me track progress, and it reminded me daily that I was taking charge. On the nights I felt doubt creeping in, is this too radical? Or, they'll never understand. I reviewed my log and felt renewed resolve. Facts and records, once again, became my anchors. Often, people ask me, weren't you scared of being discovered? My answer is yes, but I was more scared of staying invisible in my own home. That fear fueled my courage, and because I approached the task with thoughtfulness and respect, I never felt like an intruder in my own space. I was simply reclaiming what was mine all along. As the bins multiplied and my confidence grew, I noticed subtle shifts in my interactions. My son paused more often before he asked favors. My daughter-in-law mentioned my decluttering project with casual concern. The atmosphere hummed with unspoken questions, but no one pushed too hard. I realized that preparation doesn't just set the stage for action. It also signals to others that you're serious. With secret packing complete, I was ready for the next phase, moving from preparation to confrontation. I had the deed, my essentials packed, and my mind settled on what I would and would not accept. In the coming section, I'll share how I used technology and timing to deliver a clear, firm message to my family without raising my voice. We'll explore the art of crafting a message that changes everything and why clarity beats conflict every time. Let's continue our journey. By the time New Year's Eve rolled around, I'd done the invisible work, unearthed my deed, packed my treasures, and rehearsed my resolve. All that remained was to deliver the message that would set the new chapter in motion. But I didn't want drama. I wanted clarity. I wanted a peaceful pivot from unspoken assumptions to unmistakable boundaries. And so, I turned to technology, specifically our family group chat. Our group chat buzzed constantly. Birthday reminders, grocery requests, funny gifts. But on December 31st, at 7:00 p.m., I typed a simple sentence. Please be out of the house by January 3rd. The owner has other plans. Then, I pressed send. It felt daring typing those words, but I'd learned that ambiguity breeds confusion. If I had written a novel, I feel unappreciated. Maybe we should talk. It would have invited debate, guilt trips, and endless negotiations. Instead, I chose brevity. 14 words. No hedging, no anger. Just a clear deadline and a firm declaration of ownership. That clarity was my greatest ally. When the first notifications pinged my daughter-in-law, asking, "What does this mean?" "Are we being evicted?" I simply replied. "As owner, I'm choosing to have the home to myself starting Jan. 3. We'll talk if you'd like to stay under new terms. No apologies, no explanations beyond that." My tone was friendly, but resolute. Within minutes, my son chimed in. "Who's selling the house? What's going on?" I typed back, "No sale, just honoring my rights as the homeowner. We can discuss living arrangements if you'd like to remain." In less than an hour, dozens of messages flew, in some anxious, some defensive, some apologetic. But because I was direct, everyone understood the stakes. There was no misreading my intentions. And best of all, I hadn't raised my voice or stormed into the living room. Digital confrontation gave me both distance and authority. I want to emphasize 3 principles for using technology this way. Choose your channel wisely. Texting. In a group chat felt right for me because that's where family logistics already lived. If your primary contact is phone calls or another app, use whatever platform your family pays attention to. The key is consistency. If you mix channels, text, email, voicemail, you risk miscommunication and lost messages. 2. Keep it brief and focused. Lengthy messages invite negotiation. When you state your request in as few words as necessary, you leave less room for misunderstanding. 14 words can pack more punch than a 200-word essay. Imagine if I'd written, "I've been feeling unappreciated. Would you consider moving out by Jan?" 3. So I can have my space back. That invites debate and guilt. Instead, my simple announcement left no wiggle room. 3. Set a clear timeline. Deadlines. Turn vague promises into concrete plans. "Please move out soon" is open-ended. By January 3rd, gives everyone a date to organize around. In my case, that 2-day window after New Year's gave them time to pack, but still communicated urgency. I've seen this work in other contexts too. A friend in California used a work group chat to announce her 4-day unplugged vacation. "I'm offline, Dec. 20 to 23. Please direct urgent matters to Alex in my absence." By stating dates and alternate contacts, she escaped email overload without offending her team. Another acquaintance posted on her HOA message board, "Our home security cameras will be active Jan. 1/31. Please respect privacy by limiting nightly noise." That brief note reduced after-hours disturbances because neighbors knew exactly what to expect. Digital confrontation isn't about hiding behind a screen. It's about leveraging the channel's strengths: time-stamped clarity, asynchronous responses, and the ability to craft your words carefully. It allowed me to stand firm without tears or shouting. Of course, technology can backfire if used poorly. One well-meaning relative once sent an all-caps message, "We need to talk about X immediately," and set off panic. Another wrote a 500-word justification that read like a legal brief. Both approaches sabotaged their goals by triggering defensiveness and drowning the real request in noise. Here's a small lesson I learned: tone matters as much as content. Reading your own words aloud helps you catch unintended harshness. Avoid exclamation points when making serious requests and favor periods. In my original message, "The owner has other plans" sounds firm but neutral, not punitive. Once the texts were out, I stepped away from my phone. I didn't scroll obsessively or chase every notification. I knew clarity would prompt the right people to respond and everyone else to digest the news quietly. Within 2 hours, my daughter-in-law called me directly. Her voice trembled. "I'm sorry, Mom. We didn't realize." I listened, acknowledged her apology, and outlined options. "You're welcome to help me with utilities if you stay past the 3rd, or I'll understand if you need to find other accommodations." That conversation led to our first genuine dialogue. In years, no shouting, no passive aggression, just direct negotiation. She admitted she'd taken my presence for granted. I acknowledged the chaos I'd tolerated. We found middle ground, but only after the initial message created space for honesty. Sending that text wasn't the end of conflict, it was the start of solutions. It showed my family that I was serious, but also open to discussion. And because I controlled the framing, the focus stayed on practical arrangements rather than emotional blame games. As you consider using technology for your own boundaries, remember, it's not cowardice, it's strategy. When face-to-face confrontations escalate, tone can waver. When calls spill over, words can tumble into regret. Texts give you time to choose words that reflect your best self: firm, clear, and respectful. With the messages sent and the responses trickling in, I felt a new energy in my home. The air, once thick with unspoken expectations, cleared enough for real conversation. In the next section, we'll dive into that negotiation phase, how to sit down or chat online with your loved ones and turn confrontation into collaboration. We'll explore communication tools like I statements, active listening, and how to craft a family charter that honors everyone's needs. Let's move into that next chapter together. When the last of my family's boxes rolled out of the driveway on that January morning, I stood on the porch and took a deep breath. The house felt different, lighter, quieter, but also brimming with possibility. In the weeks that followed, I discovered that reclaiming my home went hand in hand with reclaiming myself. This was the empowerment phase, where I transformed a house of unspoken expectations into a sanctuary of respect, growth, and joy. My first task was simple but symbolic: make the bed. Not the thin mat on the floor, but the one in my own room, dressed in fresh sheets and my grandmother's quilt. I fluffed the pillows, arranged them just so, and stepped back. That act to smooth out fabric that was once crumpled beneath someone else's entitlement felt like smoothing wrinkles from my own life. It reminded me that small rituals can hold immense power. Next, I turned my attention to the kitchen. Before the holidays, I'd kept only the bare minimum of dishes, the rest tucked away or taken by my family. Now, I pulled out my favorite blue and white dinnerware, the set I'd collected on small trips with my late husband. I arranged the plates on open shelving and hung a small painting I'd done years ago of wildflowers by a stream. Suddenly, the kitchen wasn't just functional. It reflected me. It was the first room where I didn't feel like a guest. I learned early on that empowerment isn't about grand renovations. It's about honoring the small details that resonate with your identity. For the living room, I repurposed a wicker chair I'd stored in the attic. I recovered its cushion in a soft sage green fabric and placed it by the window with a little side table. There, I could sit with my tea and read, watching birds flit outside. In that chair, I felt both peaceful and proud. This corner was mine to shape, mine to enjoy. Outside, I tackled the garden next. I dug my hands into cool soil and planted marigolds, lavender, and daisies, bright, low-maintenance blooms that would return each year. Gardening taught me that growth takes time. Seeds don't sprout overnight, and boundaries don't solidify in a day. But as I tended those flowers, I saw new shoots push through the earth, a living testament to renewal. I found that nurturing my garden mirrored nurturing my own spirit. Beyond home decor and flower beds, I invested in self-care routines I'd long neglected. I signed up for a gentle yoga class at the senior center, a place I'd driven by but never entered. The first session was challenging. My balance wobbled, and I worried about looking clumsy. But the instructor's soothing voice and the camaraderie of classmates aged 50 and up made me feel at home. Week by week, I noticed my posture improve, my breathing deepen, and a sense of inner calm settle in. Once or twice a month, I treated myself to a local pottery workshop. There's something profoundly grounding about molding clay with your hands, feeling the cool, malleable earth shift beneath your fingers. Creating imperfect bowls and whimsical mugs reminded me that beauty often comes in unexpected shapes. When I brought my handmade pieces home, they felt like physical reminders that I could shape my life anew. Another powerful moment came when I decided to take a short trip to Sedona. I hadn't traveled alone in years, but I booked a cozy bed and breakfast overlooking the red rocks. Walking the trails with my cane, I felt the sun warm my face and the wind carry away lingering doubts. That escape wasn't an indulgence. It was a statement I deserved experiences that nourished me too. On the final day, I picked up a small turquoise pendant from a local artisan, a keepsake, to carry that freedom home. Amid these changes, I discovered the value of community. I invited neighbors over for a low-key, housewarming tea. No formal speeches, just cups of chamomile, homemade lemon bars, and conversation. I shared my journey briefly, more as a human-to-human connection than a grand announcement. To my delight, neighbors thanked me for opening my home and offered to help with future projects. Their kindness reinforced that empowerment isn't isolation, it's inviting others to celebrate your growth. Throughout this phase, I kept a simple journal. Each evening, I wrote 3 things I'd done that honored my space or my well-being, painted the living room shelf, took a nap without guilt, signed up for ceramics class. Seeing these small wins in black and white boosted my motivation and helped me track progress. That daily practice was a lesson in itself. Empowerment flourishes when you acknowledge each step forward, no matter how modest. As I rebuilt my home, I also rebuilt my self-image. Where once I saw a woman defined by service to others, I now saw someone capable of creativity, boundaries, and self-care. I began using I statements in conversations. I'd love help with dinner prep, or I need to rest this afternoon. Speaking up felt strange at first, but each time I did, my sense of agency grew stronger. Before long, guests started noticing the changes. My son commented on the lavender-scented breeze when he visited. My daughter-in-law admired the new cushions on the wicker chair. Even my grandchildren seemed to understand that Grandma's house was a place of welcome, yet not taken for granted. They'd tiptoe through the living room to see what new flower I'd planted, or help me stir batter for a fresh batch of cookies, asking, "Can I do this part, Grandma?" Those moments warmed my heart more than any spotless countertop ever could. One more insight emerged. Rebuilding isn't a one-time event. It's an ongoing practice. As seasons changed, I rotated cushions, hung seasonal wreaths, and shifted plants from sunny windowsills to shaded corners. Each change was a reminder that my life and my home are living things. They grow, adapt, and flourish when nurtured with intention. With my home restored and my self-esteem blossoming, I felt ready to share my story beyond my walls. That next step, turning personal transformation into a message that could help others, was on the horizon. In our concluding section, we'll explore how I took these lessons into the wider world, crafting authentic social media posts, connecting with elder advocacy groups, and inspiring others to recognize their own power. Let's move into that final chapter and see how a single story can become a beacon for many. By the time my home felt truly mine again, when each flower bed, each cushion, each piece of pottery whispered my name, I realized my journey wasn't just a personal victory. It was a story that could lift up others who'd felt unseen in their own homes. So I did something I never expected. I picked up my phone and began to share. It started with a short video clip. I stood in my living room, now awash in morning light, and spoke directly to the camera. "Hi, I'm Helen. A few months ago, I felt invisible in my own home. But then I found my deed, packed my keepsakes, and reclaimed my space. If you've ever felt unseen, this is for you. I didn't script every word. I just spoke with the warmth and honesty I would use with a close friend. I posted that video to my private Facebook page, thinking maybe a dozen friends would watch. Instead, the views climbed first, a few dozen, then hundreds. Comments poured in. Thank you. I'm preparing to move back in with my mom and was terrified she'd steamroll me, wrote one woman. I'm 45 and my in-laws live with us. This gives me hope, wrote another man. I realized how many people were hungry for guidance and encouragement. Sharing your story isn't about seeking attention. It's about connecting through shared experience. When we speak our truth, we give others permission to acknowledge their own. I saw that in action when a former neighbor, Carol, messaged me. I've been caring for my father for 2 years and stopped celebrating my own birthdays. Your story reminded me I deserve joy too. I'm planning a small party next week. At first, the positive feedback felt exhilarating and a little scary. I worried I'd overshare or say the wrong thing. But then I remembered the power of imperfect authenticity. I didn't edit out my shaky voice when I choked up describing the cold cup of tea on Christmas Eve. I left in the moment when I laughed uncertainly as I showed my packed bins. That vulnerability made the message real. I decided to build on that momentum. I created a simple one-page guide, 5 steps to reclaim your space, that distilled my process. 1. Recognize invisible labor. 2. Unearth your rights. 3. Prepare quietly. 4. Communicate clearly. And 5. Rebuild with intention. I formatted it in large, friendly fonts with small photos, my deed a labeled bin, a snapshot of the family chat screen, my wicker chair. I offered it as a free, downloadable PDF for anyone who wanted a roadmap. To my delight, local elder advocacy groups reached out. The county's senior center invited me to speak at a luncheon. Standing before a room of 60 women and men, I felt my heart whirl until I saw nods and tears as I recounted my journey. When I opened the floor for questions, one woman asked, "How did you stay calm when you sent that text?" I shared the 3 principles I'd learned: channel brevity, timeline, and watched her eyes light up with relief that she too could frame her words with confidence. Another group, a neighborhood book club, invited me to lead a discussion on boundary setting. We read chapters from an elder care handbook, and then I shared my real-life examples. We practiced all I statements in pairs. I need my privacy on Sundays. I appreciate your help, but please ask first. That hands-on rehearsal gave members the tools to assert themselves gently but firmly. Meanwhile, online engagements grew. A caregiving blog featured my story under the headline, "A Grandma's Guide to Reclaiming Home." The article linked to my PDF, and within days, I received email from a social worker in Texas who'd used my steps to help a client move her adult children into an assisted living facility, something the woman had been afraid to broach alone. Through it all, I learned a few truths about extending impact stories. Spark change. When you share your own experience, warts and all, you inspire others to see their situations differently. My tale wasn't unique in its pain. It was universal in its themes of respect and belonging. People connected with that. Resources amplify reach. A heartfelt video can move people, but a concise guide gives them a next step. By packaging my process into a PDF and offering it freely, I transformed inspiration into action. Collaboration strengthens credibility. Partnering with local organizations, from senior centers to caregiving blogs, brought my message to audiences I couldn't reach alone. Their endorsement reassured hesitant listeners that this wasn't just one woman's eccentric project. Vulnerability builds trust, leaving the shaky takes and emotional pauses intact made my message relatable. Perfection creates distance. Authenticity invites empathy. A practical example, after my luncheon talk, a local community college invited me to teach a short evening course called Home and Heart Boundaries for Caregivers. Over 6 weeks, attendees learned legal basics, like how to read a deed communication exercises and self-care techniques. We ended each class with a relaxation exercise, light stretching, or guided breathing to underscore that caregiver well-being is part of the equation. In time, I saw ripples of change. A woman in the class reported back that after drafting her own Notice of Boundaries letter, her roommate started knocking before entering and offering help with chores. A man shared that he asked his elderly father to start paying a modest share of utilities and found the father grateful for the chance to contribute. Seeing these small victories reminded me of something essential. Extending impact isn't about solving everyone's problems single-handedly. It's about seeding ideas and supporting people as they reclaim their own agency. If one person finds the courage to say no or to host her first self-care night, that's a victory that echoes through families and communities. Before we close this chapter, here's one more lesson: your story evolves as you do. My initial video and PDF were just the beginning. As I learned more about mediation services, about elder legal rights, about self-care workshops, I updated my materials, added new sections, and invited guest experts to webinars. Impact isn't static. It grows with each new insight. Now, as we prepare to explore the final section, long-term relationships and how to nurture, respect, and repair bonds over time, remember that sharing your story was the bridge from personal transformation to communal change. In the next chapter, we'll look at how to maintain the momentum, rebuild trust, and celebrate together, all while honoring the boundaries that keep both care and respect alive. Let's move forward, ready to weave our newfound strength into lasting connections. When I first reclaimed my home and my sense of self, it felt like a private victory, a quiet triumph behind closed doors. But the more I reflected on my journey, the more I realized it wasn't just my story. It was a template for anyone who's ever felt invisible under their own roof. Sharing that story became my next mission, and I quickly discovered that one person's experience can ripple outward in surprising ways. I started modestly with a single Facebook post. I wrote a few honest sentences I spent years caring for everyone else, only to wake up on New Year's Day and realize I'd lost sight of my own worth. If you need help finding your voice, here's what worked for me. I attached a photo of my freshly made bed, draped in my grandmother's quilt. Within 24 hours, the post had been shared dozens of times, and comments poured in stories of other caregivers who felt the same erasure. That initial slice of vulnerability taught me a fundamental truth: when you speak from the heart, people listen. But speaking alone isn't enough. You also need to offer practical next steps. So I created a simple one-page guide, Reclaiming Your Space in 5 Actions. I laid it out with clear headings, brief bullet points, and small visuals. My packed bin's the deed, a snippet of the family chat. I offered it as a free PDF download and watched the click-throughs climb. Within a week, a local nonprofit that advocates for seniors reached out to partner. They invited me to host a virtual workshop on boundary setting. I prepared a 45-minute presentation, weaving my personal narrative with actionable advice. Identify your invisible labor. Write down the tasks you do every day that go unthanked. Notice patterns. Are you the default driver, chef, or housekeeper? Gather your facts. Locate any property or lease documents. Make photocopies or digital scans to guard against loss. Prepare quietly. Pack essentials in unmarked bins. Label them simply bin A, bin B to avoid drawing attention. Communicate clearly. Use your preferred channel, text, email, or in person to set deadlines and expectations. Keep messages brief, focused, and friendly. Rebuild with intention. Redecorate a corner of your home to reflect your personality. Reinvest time in hobbies or self-care routines you've neglected. By the end of the session, attendees, mostly caregivers themselves, were nodding and typing notes. One woman named Lorraine shared afterward that the tip about clear channel choice had been a revelation. I always called my daughter to ask for help, she said. But I never realized a text with a deadline would actually get us both on the same page. That workshop showed me how personal stories, when coupled with practical tools, become powerful catalysts for change. I didn't stop there. I partnered with a local senior center to lead an in-person family boundaries lab. We kicked off by watching a short reenactment video of my own family chat exchange. Then, participants broke into small groups to role-play boundary conversations using I statements like, "I need Tuesday evenings to rest. Could you pick up dinner one night a week?" The lab ended with each person drafting their own notice of boundaries, a one-page letter they could adapt and send. One couple, Marion and Tom, used the lab to negotiate living arrangements with their adult daughter and her partner. Armed with a collaboratively drafted agreement, they now share chores equitably and honor quiet hours. Marion later told me, "We still love having them here. We just love having fairness even more." I've learned that extending impact is not about grand gestures, but about creating simple, repeatable actions. Here are a few lessons I've gathered. Lesson 1: Stories. Build empathy. When you share a genuine personal journey, complete with missteps and triumphs, you validate others' feelings and encourage them to act. Lesson 2: Tools. Drive action. A heartfelt anecdote moves hearts, but checklists and templates move feet. Balance emotion with clear next steps. Lesson 3: Collaboration multiplies reach. Partnering with nonprofits, senior centers, or caregiving blogs connects you with audiences you couldn't reach alone and lends credibility to your message. Lesson 4: Vulnerability invites trust. Don't polish away your imperfections. Leaving in moments of hesitation or tears shows that transformation is messy and possible. A tangible example came when a caregiving podcast invited me on air. The host asked about my exact message in that fateful group chat. I explained how I chose brevity, 14 words, and a clear date. After the episode aired, emails poured in from listeners who used that same formula to set boundaries with roommates, partners, and even coworkers. One man wrote, "I never thought a text could feel so powerful. It freed me from dread and kick-started honest conversations." As momentum grew, I realized I needed a sustainable way to keep resources organized. I launched a simple website, Helen's Homebound Help, where visitors can access my PDF watch, video snippets, and find links to elder law services. I also included a blog where I post short reflections, how to read your deed, how to draft a friendly notice, recipes for boundary-setting smoothies, my playful nod to self-care. Traffic to the site doubled month over month, driven largely by social shares and word of mouth. Of course not every outreach is smooth. I once sent an invitation to speak at a regional caregiving conference and received a curt reply, "We focus on medical training, not personal stories." It stung, but it taught me to tailor my message to the audience. For medical professionals, I highlighted the connection between caregiver boundaries and patient outcomes, showing that when caregivers aren't overwhelmed, they provide better support. That reframing earned me a slot on the conference agenda the following year. Extending impact also means listening. I regularly survey my workshop attendees. What helped? What felt missing? What new questions arose? Their feedback led me to add a section on navigating cultural expectations, recognizing that in some families, elders feel bound by tradition to provide endless care. I incorporated discussion prompts on balancing respect for culture with personal well-being. That addition resonated deeply with participants from diverse backgrounds. With each iteration, my resources grew stronger and more inclusive. I invited guest experts, an elder law attorney for a Q&A webinar, a therapist to talk about caregiver burnout, a financial planner to discuss sharing household expenses. Their insights enriched the conversation and offered a fuller toolkit to those who joined. As I look back, I see how sharing my story transformed me as much as it helped others. I went from private courthouse steps to virtual podiums, from kitchen corners to community centers. Yet the thread that tied it all together was authenticity, showing who I was, warts and all, and offering clear, practical ways to make change. Now, as we prepare to explore our final chapter, long-term relationships, repair, respect, and renewal, I invite you to reflect on your own journey. How might your experiences, your voice, and your lessons become beacons for others in the next section? We'll delve into maintaining healthy boundaries over time, nurturing mutual respect with loved ones, and celebrating the ongoing work of rebuilding relationships. Let's step forward together. As the months turned into a year, I realized that setting boundaries and reclaiming my space was only the beginning. The real test lay in maintaining those boundaries while repairing and nourishing the relationships I still held dear. After all, family isn't just a contract. It's a living network of emotions, shared history, and mutual care. In this final chapter, we'll explore how to sustain respect and renewal over the long haul. When my daughter-in-law and son first moved back in under our new terms, there was excitement and inevitably a few stumbles. They'd occasionally slip into old habits, leaving a mug on the counter without rinsing it, borrowing a towel without asking. At first, I felt a flicker of irritation, the familiar sting of feeling taken for granted. But instead of letting resentment build, I leaned on one principle I discovered early on: gentle, timely reminders. One Saturday morning, I noticed an unwashed dish by the sink. Rather than stew, I called out, "Hey, I put out dish soap in that blue bottle by the window. Could you give it a quick rinse?" My tone was light, almost cheerful. They both looked up slightly sheepish, and my son said, "Sorry, Mom, thanks for the reminder." That small exchange reset the dynamic without making it a big deal. Over time, they began rinsing as a default, showing that consistent, kind communication keeps respect alive. Beyond daily habits, long-term repair involves deliberate rituals that honor everyone's contributions. We established a monthly house meeting over tea and cookies. We'd gather in the kitchen, no phones, no distractions, and celebrate wins. Mom's new flower beds look amazing. Voice concerns. Laundry got backed up this week. And plan ahead. Let's coordinate our holiday schedule. These meetings never lasted more than 20 minutes, but they created a regular forum for mutual accountability and gratitude. In addition to house meetings, we introduced a shared calendar app. Before I'd scramble to remember whose turn it was to take out the trash or pick up groceries. Now, each person logs their chores for the week. The app sends gentle reminders to everyone's phone. If a task is missed, I can casually ask, "Did the app buzz you about recycling day?" rather than bearing the full burden of oversight. This simple tool redistributed responsibility and reinforced that keeping our home running is a collective effort. Long-term renewal also means carving out one-on-one time. Boundaries can feel impersonal if they're only about rules, so I invited my daughter-in-law to join me for a weekly baking date. She picks the recipe. I share the kitchen. I set aside a guys' night with my son and grandchildren for movie marathons on Fridays. These predictable pockets of connection remind us that respect doesn't preclude closeness. Instead, it creates space for deeper bonds. Of course, relationships ebb and flow. There were days when my resolve softened, when an emotional plea from my grandson, "Grandma, we miss you," sleeping in the guest room, tugged at my heart. In those moments, I gently reiterated our agreement. "I love you so much, and I'm glad you feel at home here. My bed is my space. Let's keep it that way, so I can stay cozy too." He'd nod, sometimes pout a little, but always accept it, because he knew I valued him and was consistent in my words. Repair sometimes requires apology. Early on, I was so focused on asserting myself that I occasionally came across as prickly. A few weeks in, I noticed my granddaughter hesitated before hugging me goodbye. I asked her if I'd done something wrong. She said, "Mommy said you seemed grumpy sometimes." I realized I needed to model accountability. Later that day, I told my family, "I'm sorry if I sounded harsh earlier. I'm still learning how to speak up kindly." Their warm response, hugs understanding, reinforced that admitting missteps can actually strengthen trust. Long-term respect also thrives when you celebrate each other's successes. When my son earned a promotion at work, I arranged a small brunch in his honor, puff pastries, fruit salad, and candles on the dining table. I made a point to say, "I'm proud of you and grateful for the support you give our family." Recognition is a powerful way to show that boundaries don't mean indifference. They mean valuing each person's whole life. Another aspect of renewal is adapting as circumstances change. When my daughter-in-law became pregnant again, I anticipated her need for extra help. I offered to take over morning school drop-offs so she could rest. I updated our chore calendar to reflect her needs and mine. Flexibility keeps boundaries from feeling rigid or punitive. It reminds everyone that we're all on a journey together. To maintain long-term harmony, I also revisit my own self-care. I continue with yoga classes, gardening, and monthly pottery workshops. Some weeks, I'll announce that I'm taking a Mom's Day to recharge, and my family knows not to interrupt unless it's urgent. By caring for myself consistently, I model the importance of balance, a lesson that silently teaches them to respect their own needs too. Periodically, I close my journal and write down 3 relationship wins of the week: a pleasant house meeting, a successful chore completed by someone else, or a moment of laughter shared. Reviewing these positives keeps me focused on progress, not perfection. Throughout this long-term process, I've noticed a beautiful shift. The same family that once viewed me as a background fixture has grown into partners who value my well-being. My daughter-in-law surprised me on my birthday with a homemade card and a dainty teacup. My son checks in regularly. Mom, how's your back today? Need me to carry dishes? These gestures remind me that boundaries can coexist with genuine care. If there's one overarching lesson from this chapter, it's that lasting respect is built on consistency, communication, and compassion. Boundaries lay the foundation, but positive rituals and open dialogue build the house of trust that stands through years. As we bring this journey to a close, remember that every family dynamic is unique, and there's no one-size-fits-all formula. But the principles remain the same. Honor your worth, assert your space calmly, and weave in regular practices that foster mutual care. When you do, you transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone under your roof. In our final wrap-up, we'll reflect on the full arc from invisible caregiver to empowered homeowner and respected matriarch, and offer a concise checklist to guide you as you embark on your own path of respect and renewal. Let's take that final step together.